Okay, let's open in prayer. Abba, Father, in the name of Yeshua, we just want to bless you and thank you again for another week, Yahweh, that we've passed through these difficult times leading up to the Passover. Now, Yahweh, we are before your presence on this holy Shabbat. And how we thank you, Yahweh, that you never leave or forsake us. We thank you, Yahweh, for this shalom peace that you give us on this Sabbath. We pray for those who are sick or not feeling well or have other issues, Yahweh, that they could not be here, that you will comfort them where they are. We praise you and we glorify you for your grace upon our lives, Yahweh, because so often, many times in a day, we come so far away from hitting that mark, Yahweh, of what you expect us to do, whether it's through weakness or ignorance or even willfulness, not doing what you want, Yahweh. You still bless us anyway. And for that we thank you. And now, Yahweh, as the Passover is approaching, we are to enter into that time now where we should really be taking ourselves very, very seriously and start looking and examining ourselves to see whether we're in the faith or not. And really ask ourselves some very, very hard questions about whether we are in the faith or not. If we're really doing, if we're willing to do everything that we can possibly do that you expect from us. And if we say no, we're not, and we're not willing, then we should not take of that Passover, lest we eat and drink judgment unto ourselves, Abba. So help us, Abba. Help us to understand your word today. Help us to gain greater knowledge and understanding of what your Passover is all about and how we're to keep it in light of how Yeshua gave us the example along with his disciples. So Yahweh, I pray that my word can go forth now here today. I pray it's a word of edification. I pray it's a word of conviction. I pray it's a word of uplifting and helping us to feel, Yahweh, like we got something out of this day, that we might be able to glorify you. In the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. Amen. Well, we're going into part 2 now, the series on the Passover, which is called the Last Passover Supper, which is not a popular thing to say in the Nazarene or Messianic faiths. And yet, when I read my scriptures over and over again, I consistently see tons of evidence that it was the last Passover supper. And as I stated last time, I'm going to continue to drive the point home. I'm treating this as if I was like an attorney and I had to go into a courtroom and plead this case. And I believe that the greatest weight of preponderance of evidence to prove my point is way beyond the shadow of a doubt, which I will show through these teachings as we go through the next couple of weeks. So, as I was putting this message here together today, I was remembered of the scripture in John chapter 5, verse 46 and 47, where Yeshua says, breaking in, it says, "For if you believed Moses, you would believe and commit your trust to me, for he wrote in description about me." So when we go to the Torah, and in this particular case we're talking about the Passover, everything that Moses and the Israelites did, they did as a shadow picture of when the real Lamb would come and how he would fulfill it when he was here. And this is what we're going through in this whole lesson. Verse 47, "But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" And so how poignant it is how Yeshua makes this statement, because this is the paradox today. This is where we are in the body of Messiah today. We have the vast majority of people who have accepted hook, line, and sinker what Jewish traditionalism or Talmudic law or the traditions of the elders has handed down to us over the millennia. And it has been accepted without questioning it. And that's the problem. And so what he's saying is, if you didn't believe Moses' writings, how are you going to believe his words? And on this subject, of all subjects, this is probably one of the most important things that we should be believing Yeshua's own words about. And yet, sadly, we don't. At least most of us don't. We want to fight and hold on to the tradition. And we don't want to let it go. We don't want to even question it. And yet when somebody like myself who gives a teaching like this comes up with all the facts to show it, it's all written off as you're crazy. You're insane. You're out of your mind. You know, how do you break with what has been done for so many millennia or so many centuries? And what I say is what Yeshua says. If you would have believed what Moses did and what he said, then you would be able to believe his words when he states it. And that will be my case today. This is what I will present today. Is what did Yeshua actually say about this subject? Because last time I spent the whole introduction to this subject on explaining the spiritual ramifications for not accepting what he said, but accepting tradition of the elders. And I went through greatly in explaining the spiritual consequences of accepting those dogmas, and it leads you into the covenant of Hagar. And I'm not going to belabor that any longer. I already did that in part 1. So let's move on. First, we must realize that Moshe led the 12 tribes of Israel, and he did not teach Judaism and Talmudic law. This has to be established in our minds if we're going to be able to move forward in this subject and be able to accept them on one premise after another. This is a foundational premise. And it's something that has to be discussed if we're going to understand this subject, because in order to understand how we arrived at the Passover being eaten on the evening of the 15th rather than on the evening of the 14th, we need to understand how we got to this point. And how we got to this point, it came through Talmudic law. So that came much later. Moses taught a priest-based concept from Torah, where Judaism teaches a rabbinic Jewish one. And so this we have to come to an agreement on. Yeshua and the disciples or the apostles spent so much of their time defending the faith that Yeshua gave to them against the rabbinic Judaism of their day and the traditions of the elders of their day. So it's very important that we must establish that what we're fighting today is exactly the same thing that Yeshua and the disciples fought back then. The 12 tribes of Israel were Torah-based as taught by Moshe, where Judaism is based on a religion of one tribe only, Yehuda, or the Jews, and does not believe that the other 11 tribes are anything other than Jews. Another erroneous statement. We can say it this way: all Jews are Israelites, but not all Israelites are Jews. This is another fallacy within the body of Messiah that we still have not come to grips with. We actually have messianic fellowships if you believe in the two-house theory, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, Ephraimites, however you want to say it. If you go in there, you are not welcome. I have been kicked out of places because of that belief system. And I was told, you are not welcome here, don't waste your time. And so this is another area that's a problem, because if you're going to accept the fact that all Jews are Israel and all Israelite are Jews, then there is only one Jewish religion. And that there is the crux of the problem that we're dealing with today, because we're putting all our stocks, all our investments into the concept of Judaism, that it is correct when it states that we are to keep the Passover on the evening of the 15th, which is the first day of unleavened bread. That's a problem, as you will see as I go through this. In order to be a Jew, you had to be born from the tribe of Yehuda, which are the Jews. It is against Torah teaching for one to be born through any other tribe other than Levi to be a priest. So it's impossible, it's not possible for somebody who is a Jew to be a Levitical priest. Yet the tradition of Judaism teaches a Jewish philosophy without the priesthood. They may have included some aspects of the priesthood in it, but what they've done is usurp the authority of the priest, and they've taken it on themselves. Let's move on. In Hebrews chapter 7, we see this principle in verse 14, where it says, "For it is evident that our master arose from Yehuda, from Judah, of which tribe Moses spoke nothing concerning the priesthood." And that's because if you're from the tribe of Yehuda, you are not in a position to be a priest. And so you had to be from the tribe of Levi to be a priest. And that was the legal requirement. Yet during the Rabbinic period of history, we see where prominent Jews came up to the temple and prevented people from even entering into the temple to see the priest, and later usurped that power away from the priest and sent them running to the Qumran mountains alongside the Dead Sea. Thus, the tribe of Yehuda Jews took over the temple and established what we now see today as Talmudic Judaism. The writer Benjamin J. Siegel, this article is taken from him. Let's read this for a moment. He says, Judaism, even as we know it today, is primarily Rabbinic Judaism formed during that period. The millennium which witnessed this growth was marked by a new type of leader and a unique collection of literature. The new leaders were the rabbis. Scholarship was the basis of their position, and they saw themselves primarily as students and teachers, interpreters of the tradition as it was handed down. Unlike the biblical priests, the rabbis inherited neither title nor glory. Each student had to earn the title of rabbi. Notice this, they had to earn the title of rabbi, which was granted only after much study and proof of knowledge and acumen and understanding. Unlike the biblical prophets, who were understood to be inspired individuals. This is the crux of what I've been speaking of for so long. If you accept that Judaism, Talmudic Judaism, is a true, authentic religion that we should be extracting our doctrine from, what you're in essence saying is it was inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh. That would have to be your premise. After all, if you don't accept Buddhism as being inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh, that's why we don't see people in the body of Messiah running to Buddhism to get their doctrines. So why is it any different with Judaism? And so what he's saying here is that they earn their titles, and they were not inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh like the prophets were or the patriarchs of old. So we have to at some point come to the conclusion that if Judaism is not inspired by the Ruach HaKodesh, but is a concoction of man's traditions, perpetuated on man, then why are we running and accepting what they are telling us, in this case about the Passover, as being eaten on the first day of unleavened bread on the evening of the 15th of Nisan? We should not be doing that. Let's move on to the article. The rabbis banded together in a group of leadership centered in the academies. He goes on to say, outstanding individuals, of course, gained prominence among their colleagues. But the foremost characteristic of the age was the excitement of deliberation. And the great challenge of the period was interpretation. See, because what they would do is they would take a concept of what Moses says, and they would argue amongst themselves to see who had the best argument of what they thought Moses meant by something that he said. And that's why you got so many different interpretations enters in Talmud and the Talmudic writings. Moving on, understanding and refining the differences of approach and of substance while maintaining a workable, unified system. And you can find this article here. I've got it here in case you want to look that up. So let's look at one of the common mistakes today, that all of Israel are Jews. To do so, we need to determine what makes a Jew in the first place. To be a Jew, one needs to be born through the tribe of Yehuda, or the Jews, as I had stated before. So here what I'm going to do, I'm putting a visual chart. Because I find that if I can put a visual chart, I find people understand this much better. Because most people are really confused about who is Israel. And we are Israel here. And so what you'll see, the lineage here from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and so forth. And then on this line along here horizontally, you'll see the 12 sons of Israel. And clearly what you see is under Levi in the red are the priestly tribe. So anybody who's born from that lineage can be a priest. It's the Aaronic priesthood. And then you see next to that where it's Yehuda or Judah, those are the Jews. But you don't see these other brothers descending from any one of these two tribes. And so they are separate tribes. They are not Jews and they are not priests, and we can't treat them that way. And so it's important to be able to look at this for what it really is. Likewise, only those born through the lineage of Levi can be a priest. Another way of saying it is, as I said before, all Jews are Israelites, but not all Israelites are Jews. This is a very important concept. So let's take a look at the difference between these two in 2 Kings chapter 16, verses 5 through 6. It says, "Then Rezin," which means delight, the king of Syria, and Pekah, means to watch, son of Remaliah, who is adorned as an ornament, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to battle, and they besieged Ahaz, which means possessor, but were unable to conquer him. At that time, Rezin, king of Syria, recovered Elath to Syria and drove the Jews, this is Israel, driving the Jews from Elath. And the Syrians came to Elath and dwelt there to this day. So clearly what we see here is there is a war going on between the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. And Yahweh calls the northern kingdom Israel, or the house of Israel, who is at war with the Jews who are in the southern kingdom, which is primarily Yehuda. Of course, you have Benjamin mixed in, and a half tribe of Levi also mixed in there as well. But the point here is that Yahweh is making a distinction between those who are Israel and those who are of the tribe of the Jews. For example, Shaul was a Jew, but not by blood. He was a Benjamite, so he himself says, so he was a Jew by nationality, but not by birth. This is an important distinction to make. My wife is from Colombia, but she's an American citizen. So if you ask her what is her nationality, you would have to qualify the statement by saying what nationality you are as far as a citizenship, or what nationality are you according to bloodline. Well, if you ask her by bloodline, well, I'm Colombian, but by citizenship, I am American. So there's a distinction, and it's important to make that distinction when we ask these questions. But Paul himself even says, circumcise the 8th day of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, concerning the law of Pharisee, which is a separatist. But he lived in the southern kingdom, so he was identified nationally as a Jew, but by bloodline a Benjamite. Important distinctions that we have to make. The kingdom of Judah was the southern half, comprised of Yehuda, Benjamites, and a half tribe of Levi, which were the priests. The northern 10 tribes were that is called the house of Israel. Today we are largely the modern day descendants of them, also known as Ephraim. And here's a map showing where that borderline was broken between the two of them. And that's where the northern kingdom was fighting against the southern kingdom. So just a little bit of quick history here to show what is Israel, what is not, and how this all fits into this whole thing, which will become clearer as I go on through these lessons. So breaking down the timeline, many assert that Yeshua did not eat the Passover. I mean, that is fought tooth and nail, basically to death in the body of Messiah and in Christianity. If that is the case, and if it was the Passover night when they were supposed to eat and he refused, he sinned and he is not the Messiah. Would that not be true? Because while he was here in the flesh, he was still under the Old Testament dispensation. Because what he was doing was passing the baton to the disciples, who were then transferring us into the New Testament dispensation. And so if he refused to eat the Passover, he would have been in violation of the Torah, which would have disqualified him from being our Messiah. So surely that could not have happened. He was still under the Old Testament dispensation, as I said before, and as such was legally required to eat the Passover on the 14th. The question here is, do we believe Yeshua's words over tradition? Let me repeat. The question here is, do we believe Yeshua's words over tradition? And I would sadly say, no, we do not. No, we do not. Too many, and I would say the majority of those in the body of Messiah, and is not meant as a condemnational statement, it is made as a statement of fact, do not believe Yeshua's words. I am finding this troubling because what I'm finding, like not only this subject, I'm finding many other subjects that when Yeshua makes certain statements, they disregard those statements and say he didn't mean that or he didn't say that. Yet dogmatically, ad verbum, word for word, he makes certain statements and they say, no, he didn't say that. And they try to find some kind of a creative self-rationalization way to reason away what Yeshua said. And this is what we're going to investigate in this lesson here this week. So let's look at all the places where Yeshua said he would eat the Passover. I went through all of the Gospels and into Acts, and I found every scripture that I could find where Yeshua talks directly on this subject. And we're going to go through it. It's a little meticulous, but we're going to go through it because I want there to be no doubt in the mind of anybody who's watching this or is in earshot of my voice that Yeshua meant what he said and he said what he meant. And that we are confused. We have taken on the covenant of Hagar because we've accepted what Judaism has told us, and it's a covenant of flesh. And we're using our flesh to reason these traditions as being dogma, and they're not to be messed with. I'm going to mess with it, and I'm going to do it now. Let's get started. The first place we find is in Matthew chapter 26, verse 17 through 20. Now, on the first day of the feast, this feast is not in the original text, if you'll look for it, and it was added. But let's move on. Of unleavened bread, which is azumus. That means that it's uncorrupted bread. The disciples came to Yeshua saying to him, where and in what locality do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover? Now, this is the disciples talking. Okay, this is not Yeshua, this is the disciples at this point. And the special sacrifice connected to it. So this word pasha means and the special sacrifice connected to it. That's what's in the Greek. And I'm finding that too many of these people that are holding on to this other idea that it's to be eaten on the first day of unleavened bread on the evening of the 15th are not going in and looking at the original language. And that what they're doing is they're taking commentaries, which is men's traditions, and they're inserting them in some of these verses to make it look like it's part of the verse, but it's not in the original language. And that's another dangerous area because Yahweh tells us in the Torah not to add to my Torah and not to take away from. And they're adding words like between the evenings. They're adding words like, what's the other one? It escapes me right now. In the afternoon is another one. Doesn't appear in Scripture. But they're putting it in there as if to make you think like, just accept it. And so many have accepted it because they've not challenged to see whether between the evenings and in the afternoon in the Exodus is actually in there. And it's not. It's not in the Hebrew. Let's move on. Verse 18. And he said, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand, I will keep and fulfill by observing and performing the Passover. The word poio means fulfill by observing and performing. What does that mean? In my English, it means he's going to observe by performing the Passover, Pascha, and the special sacrifice that's connected to it. At your house with my disciples. Now we're starting to get into what Yeshua is saying. This is what he's saying. And we've got to wake up in the body of Messiah and we've got to start looking at and questioning, why do I not accept Yeshua's own words? Remember what he said. My sheep hear my voice and they follow me wherever I go. But why won't you hear his voice here? And you say, well, John, that's just one verse. Sit tight. Take a chill pill, because I got more coming. I'm going to unload it. I'm in front of the judge, and I'm pleading this case. And I will win this case with the facts that I'm presenting. There's no doubt in my mind about it. Let's move on. So the disciples did as Yeshua had directed them, and they prepared the Passover. When evening, early nighttime had come, he sat down with the 12. Now, This starts to get a little bit technical, and when we get into the other lessons in the coming weeks, I will go into more detail about this idea about what is evening and all that. And I think you're going to find it kind of fascinating with the presentation that I'm going to give. I might be next week, I'm not sure, certainly by the one after. Depends on how much I've got to deal with. So let's look at a little bit of some of the examples of evening. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 2, it says, "He answered and said unto them, When it is evening, early nighttime, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red." You see, this is an important distinction, because he's saying that the evening here, early nighttime, you can still see the sky is red. This is a tip-off. And we'll see when I get in further into the lessons, I'm going to get into extreme detail breaking down this evening idea. Because this evening thing is fulfilled in different sections within that time frame. And we need to look at the fact that evening is just not one aspect. There are different aspects to an evening. And we're going to look at it, and we're going to see technically why they brought the lambs during that evening portion. I don't want to give too much away right now on that. Let's move on. Mark chapter 1, verse 32, it says, "And at evening, the same thing, early nighttime, when the sun did set, they brought unto him all who were diseased and them that were possessed with devils." So when the sun sets, it means when the arc of the sun has dropped just below the horizon. And so you still have ambient light in the sky. So you can still see that the sky is orange from the rays of the sun. You just don't see the ball of the sun, the sphere of the sun. So it's telling us this here. This period is known as a Rabbaim. And a Rabbaim is a mixture, in the Hebrew, means a mixture of light and dark. And it says in the Hebrew that it's like fabric, where you weave fabric. Those of you who do seamstresses and you do things like that. If you look at a piece of fabric, it's all woven together. So in this context, what it means, it's light and dark woven together. That's a very specific time of day. It only lasts for a certain period of time. I'll get into the duration of that period of time in Jerusalem time in the springtime when it would have been Passover, and show you the research that I came up with when we get to that point. Is used in Hebrew for the time of the Passover lamb sacrifices. All 15 of the New Testament scriptures for this word show it to be in the time frame that in the Hebrew is classified as a Rabbaim. All 15 of them, without exception, all 15 passages that refer to that time frame are all talking to that time frame where you still see the light of the sun, you just don't see the sun. I don't know. We will look at this more extensively a little bit later on. In Mark chapter 14, pressing on, verses 12 through 18, it says, "Now on the first day of unleavened bread, which is asmus, that is uncorrupted, when they kill the Passover, and the special sacrifice connected to it, which is the lamb, his disciples said to him, Where do you want us to go and prepare that you may eat the meat of the Passover?" This word, phago, in the Greek means meat of. So clearly Yeshua, the allusion here, what they're alluding to is that Yeshua is going to eat the meat of the Passover. And yet this is the one argument that we're hearing all the time. He did not eat a Passover meal. But they're saying he's going to eat the meat of the Passover meal. You're arguing against the disciples. You're arguing against Yeshua. And you're destroying your own ability to understand the true weight of what this day is all about. Because you're substituting man's traditions for what Yeshua is trying to point back to. See, what we got to look at is that when Moses and the Israelites kept the Passover on the 14th of Nisan in Israel at that time, that was the shadow picture. That was the rehearsal for what Yeshua was going to do when he came here. And so by the time Yeshua comes to this Passover evening, the Jews have a completely different day, a completely different celebration. They've undone the Torah, as Yeshua said. And what he's doing with his disciples is giving us an example, pointing us back to the Torah and the way it was done back then. He's reestablishing the true shadow picture, the true rehearsal, the true moedim of how it should have been done. And yet we find through these accounts, we'll see, that the next day they're doing their tradition. On the next evening they're eating their Passover. So clearly there were two calendars going on here. Yeshua and the disciples were eating their Passover on one night, and the Jews were eating their Passover on the next night. So clearly there's a conflict. Clearly there's a conflict. You have to at least admit to the fact that there is a conflict, that we got two Passovers going on here. And I'm going to put my buck on Yeshua. Because if it doesn't square with Yeshua, then we need to cast it out. We need to get rid of it. Let's move on. Verse 13. And he sent out two of his disciples and said to them, Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher, which is keramion, which is of earthenware, so I'm thinking it's probably clay, of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes, say to the master of the house, The teacher says, Where is the guest room? Which is, and it's interesting because this word guest room means that it is used for the end of a journey. So apparently this guest room is designed for people who are traveling from great distances and they're coming to an end of a journey. They give them this room to go and rest and end their journey. I found that interesting in the Greek. In which I, Yeshua, I think this is Yeshua speaking, isn't it? That I, Yeshua, may eat the Passover. This is another account where Yeshua is saying he's going to eat this Passover. But why are we yelling and screaming and condemning people for teaching this when Yeshua is saying that and you're fighting against Yeshua? In his own words. You don't want to accept what Yeshua is saying? That he's going to eat this Passover? The only way I could buy that is you'd have to find some kind of historical proof that these texts never really existed. That's the only way you're going to get me to buy into that one. And you better be really good at proving to me from the historical text that these things never existed. We got more. I'm going to go through plenty more. Let's move on. And the special sacrifice connected to it with my disciples. Then he will show you a large, exceedingly great upper room, which is a balcony on an upper floor, or a second floor, it also says, furnished and prepared, there make ready for us. So it's interesting, this man with the pitcher of water, it was his house, but apparently above his house on the second floor was this special room that's used for this purpose. And he clearly, somehow, we're not told in text that I'm aware of, but we're told here that this man already knew that Yeshua wanted this room for the Passover. And my assumption is that if he was a typical Jew who keeps the Passover on the 15th of Nisan, which is the first day of unleavened bread, and he didn't keep it on the 14th, and he knew that he was preparing this room for a Passover Seder for Yeshua and his disciples, and he didn't agree with that, my guess is he probably wouldn't have given them the room. It's an assumption, but I think it's a rational assumption. I think he would have fought against that. Let's move on. So his disciples went out and came into the city and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. Here we are again, preparing the Passover. Let's move on. Mark chapter 14, verses 12 through 18. We're continuing in the evening. Here's this word again. As the sun set at the close of the day, when night starts, he came with the 12. He came with the 12. You see, I haven't gotten into it too much, but I'll give you a little glimpse. This time frame is called a Rabbaim, as I had said before. It's a mixture of light and dark. Picture it this way. In ancient Israel, or even, well, not at that time, because at that time of Yeshua, they were keeping on the afternoon, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 14th of Nisan. They would be doing it differently. But in ancient Israel, when the priests were really controlled, the authentic priests were in control of the temple, and they were doing things according to the way Yahweh had instructed them, my guess is that in the surrounding villages, a man would take his lamb, his 1-year-old lamb, and maybe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because there's maybe 2 hours left of light left, he would begin his journey through the towns or the cities or whatever and make his way up to the temple. And all the other men would be coming with their lamps. So you'd see this mass of men. Maybe at even 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they started that tradition of moving and going up, and they would all get in these lines that would be predetermined by the priest so that it could all be done in an orderly fashion. And so they would all be waiting in these lines, and then as the sun sets and it goes just below the horizon, we now enter into the Arabayim. And that's the time frame in which the priest would then begin to pray over the lambs and start sacrificing them. I'll get into more of that later. But it's interesting because this Lamb of Yahweh is coming to present himself at exactly the same time. When the sun had set and night is beginning to come in. There's a mixture of the light and dark. He's fulfilling that mandate exactly as it's prescribed in Torah. Verse 18, now as they sat in a reclining sideways position and ate, Yeshua said, "Surely I say to you, one of you who eats with me," so he's saying he's eating, "will betray me." Now the Feast of Unleavened Bread, in Luke chapter 22 verse 1, and then we'll jump to verse 6, it says, now the Feast of Unleavened Bread drew near, which is called the Passover. The Feast of Unleavened Bread that drew near, which is called the Passover. We have to understand that a lot of people are confused in the body of Messiah about this verse. But what we have to understand is that there are actually 8 days of unleavened bread. 7 of them are specifically called the days of Hamatzot. Different feasts for a different purpose. But on Passover, you're supposed to eat unleavened bread, not leavened bread. Not supposed to eat leavened bread. And yet, well, we'll get into that in a little bit. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So that's what it's sometimes referred to as the Passover as a day of unleavened bread, because it is a day of unleavened bread. That's what you're supposed to eat on Passover. We are required to eat unleavened bread on Passover once it turns dark, so there is a total of 8 days we eat unleavened bread. So let's look at this in Exodus chapter 12, verse 18 through 19, breaking into the other accounts. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at evening, which is a Reb, or Arabim, as it starts to turn dark, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening, as it turns dark. Note that there are a total of 8 days of eating unleavened bread. The 14th day starts at the end of the 13th, once the sun sets below the horizon. This is another area where I see a big problem. We seem to be confused about when does a day actually start and when does it end. Because that's where a lot of this tradition is coming from, about eating the lamb on the 15th of Nisan in the evening on the first day of unleavened bread. Is because this misconception or misunderstanding about when does a day end, or when the day starts and when it ends. So they're saying that, the scripture says keep the lamb until the 14th day. Well, the 14th day doesn't start until the sun sets on the 13th. If you're going to keep it until the 14th day at sunset, it's not the 14th, it's the 15th. Learn how to read your scriptures and understand when a day starts and when it ends. That's what we got to do. And we're not doing that. It's because tradition has corrupted us. And we don't even understand what we're doing. So he promised, cutting into verse 6 now, so he promised and sought opportunity with a favorable occasion to betray him, this is speaking of Judas betraying Yeshua, in the presence of the multitude. Then came or grew on the 13th toward the day of unleavened bread, which this is the Passover. Because again, it's the same thought process as in that verse 1, that it is the first day of unleavened bread, even though it's a Passover, because it's the first day you're going to eat unleavened bread for the next 8 days. It's a play on words. When the Passover must be killed. So we're being taught here. Again, on the Passover is when it's going to be killed and sacrificed in the fire. The day begins at sundown. This day of unleavened bread is the Passover of Yeshua on the 14th at the end of the 13th, as we see in the following text. So in verse 8, moving on, it says, "And he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare the Passover, Pascha, and the special sacrifice connected to it for us, that we may eat. Yeshua is including himself in the group. We means collectively. We will eat this Passover, which is a special sacrifice connected to the Passover. And the word eat means meat. I didn't, it said it, I say it there. I didn't see that. It's the meat. So he's going to eat with his disciples the meat. So here we're going, scripture after scripture going through these Gospels, we're seeing over and over again. A little bit of different perspectives, but it's all coming back to the same thing. All the disciples are all agreeing with each other that Yeshua said he will eat it with them, and he did eat. They're all saying that. So they said to him, "Where do you want us to prepare?" Verse 9. Verse 10. And he said to him, "Behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher, which is earthenware, of water," which I find interesting. We'll revisit this in a little bit. "For a shower from rain." Now, for the purpose of a shower, it's to take a bath or get cleaned. Okay? And we'll see something about this as we move on. It's interesting because it's been alluded that this man with the pitcher of water may have been an Essene, because an Essene has ritual baths twice a day, and he would go get fresh water in a pitcher and use that to take his ritual bath for cleansing. So it could have been an Essene. We don't know for sure, but it could have been. "And follow him into the house which he enters. Then in verse 11, you shall say to the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room?" Here it is again, that is used for one at the end of his journey, "where here we go again. Yeshua is saying again that I may eat the Passover with my disciples. I just don't see how you can construe Yeshua's words to mean something other than what he said. Now, if there's some kind of mythological meaning behind this, that it doesn't really mean what it says, I want the revelation. Please give it to me. But until I get that, and it's been 34 years I've been reading this the same way, I'm going to take him at what he says. I am eating this Passover with my disciples. It's plain language. "Then he will show you a large, exceedingly great, furnished upper room on the second floor. There make ready." Moving on, verse 13. "So they went and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. When the hour had come, he sat in a reclining position down, and the 12 apostles with him." Verse 15. "Then he said to them, with fervent desire." Now look at this, because now he's adding an emphasis. Not just that I'm going to sit down and eat with you guys, but I have a fervent desire. Now I'm burning with passion to get this over with. A fervent desire I have to eat this Passover with you. What? Before or prior to that which I suffer. Wait a minute. I'm confused, because our traditions, as many of us have been keeping, show that he didn't eat the Passover that night. It was just a Last Supper. And that they ate the Passover the night before. But he's saying, if I'm reading this right, if I'm reading it wrong, you yell out and say, "John, you're a heretic. You're reading it wrong." But I'm going to read it again. It says, with fervent desire, I have desired to eat this Passover. Not last year's, not the year to come next year, but this Passover with you, before and prior to that which I suffer. Now in my book, there's only one timeline that fits that. On the evening of the 14th of Nisan, when the sun had set on the 13th. I don't see how you can cut this some other kind of way. It does not make any sense. And I would venture to say, if you stood in front of a judge and you tried to plead that case, you're going to have a rough time overcoming this, and as well as all the other words that Yeshua said. And so it comes back again to what I had read from the beginning. And that is, if we believe Moses' words. Do we believe Moses' words? Because if we can't accept what he says, we can't accept what Yeshua is telling us here so plainly. This is plain English. Let's move on. "For I say to you, I will no longer eat of it until it was fulfilled in the kingdom. So what he's saying is, he's talking in present tense. I'm eating it now, but then right after this, no longer after this moment when I'm eating it, no longer after this will I eat it, until it's fulfilled and completed in the kingdom of Yahweh. So that means from the time that he was crucified and went back to the Father and sat at his right hand, from that moment until the kingdom comes, he's not going to eat any more of that. Let's move on. Verse 17. Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and said, "Take this and divide it amongst yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of Yahweh comes." Interestingly, he doesn't say, "I will not drink of it again," like he just talked about the Passover meal. Notice that? He didn't say, "I will not drink of it again." Does that mean he didn't take of the wine and the bread? Something to think about. Something to think about. Anyway, let's move on. And he took the bread, which, interestingly, this is an important point. You see, people in the argument with the Passover being eaten on the 15th of Nisan, which is the first day of unleavened bread after the Passover, they tried to say, and there's a famous Torah teacher who says this, or he used to, I don't know if he still does, he says he completely ignored in the Greek what it said, the showbread. And in his teaching, he said it was a loaf. Okay? And that means a loaf, you tear it. And it was raised bread. It was raised or leavened bread. Now, it doesn't say that in the Greek, but he construed it to be that way. And yet, what we find is the word artus. And it means showbread. Now, if you go back to the Torah and you look at the showbread in the temple, it's unleavened bread. And there were 12 of them. 2 stacks. And there were 12 of them. And they were all unleavened bread. Each one represented the 12 tribes of Israel. One for each tribe. And gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Artos is used by some to say it was leavened bread, but it says it was a showbread. The same unleavened bread used in the temple for the table of the showbread. You see, the thing is that we clearly know, even the traditionalists would have to admit that when they got together on the 14th of Nisan, that was the Passover. I don't think they will argue that it wasn't the Passover. I think what they're arguing is that he didn't eat a Passover Seder meal. And that it would have been okay for him to eat leavened bread. But the Torah forbids you from eating leavened bread on Passover. That's the 14th. So if Yeshua did eat leavened bread on the 14th, he defiled himself and disqualifies himself. But we got Torah teachers that are saying that he ate leavened bread. That does not square with the Torah. Period. It doesn't. We have already seen where it is commanded in the Torah that one must eat unleavened bread in the Passover, as I gave the scripture before. If Yeshua would have eaten a piece of leavened bread on this night, he would have transgressed the Torah, very simply. You break unleavened bread and you tear leavened bread. I ate matzah earlier today. I snapped it. I broke it. You don't break a loaf of bread. You tear it. You shred it. It's a different word. It has a different meaning to it. Let's go to verse 20 now. Continuing back with Luke chapter 22. Likewise, he also took the cup, which it's interesting, in the Greek it means a lot or fate and drought. So it's a cup of fate, basically. After supper, evening meal, and that comes from number 1173, means a feast supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you." Now, therefore, in John chapter 13, verses 1 through 5, it says, "Now, therefore," moving on to another account. Again, what we're doing is we're rehashing everything Yeshua said about himself in regards to the Passover. "Now, therefore," and I've interjected this part, on the 13th, just prior to the feast, which is a festival of the Passover, when Yeshua knew and perceived that his hour or season had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Verse 2, "And the supper being ended, the devil having already put in the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Verse 3, Yeshua, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from Yahweh and was going to Yahweh, rose from supper, laid aside his garments, and took a towel and girded himself. Verse 5, after that he poured water. Remember what I told you to pay attention about that water, the good man with the water? It's the same word. For a shower from rain. Is it possible that the man with the pitcher of water went to get that pitcher of water for the Passover ceremony for Yeshua? It's the exact same word that's being used here. So it seems like Yeshua picked up that same pitcher, earthen vessel of rainwater, which is for a shower to wash oneself, into a basin for a ceremony. And the word basin is a basin for a ceremony. It's not just a regular basin, but it's a basin designed for a ceremony. It's consecrated for that. And began to wash his disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Do we believe Yeshua's own words, or have we come to the point where his own words mean nothing and we are doing exactly what the rabbis want, who find excuses to make the Torah of no effect by replacing it with Talmudic tradition? Yes. That's where we are right now with so many in the body of Messiah. We have replaced the Torah with man's traditions. Now, let's take a look at the other Passover meal in the Gospel accounts. And there's a few. In John chapter 18, verse 28, it says, Then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the Praetorium, which is basically a courtroom. And it was early in the morning, but they themselves did not go into the Praetorium, lest they should be defiled. And that means contaminated morally. But that they may eat the Passover. So here we are, the night before Yeshua and the disciples ate their Passover. Now it's early in the morning when the sun's getting ready to come up. It's a different day, and they won't go into this Praetorium because they don't want to be ceremonially corrupted, because they still haven't eaten their Passover meal yet. That's going to be later in the afternoon. A side note, Caiaphas was appointed to position of high priest by the Roman government. It was not consecrated with anointing oil as prescribed by the Torah with the priesthood. This practice of appointing priests was instituted first by Antiochus IV, a Syrian ruler, and his practice continued to the day of Caiaphas. At the end of the day, it was an illegal priesthood, pure and simple, not done according to Torah standard. He also was not from the Aaronic line, which makes his decrees illegal, and Yeshua was put to death as an innocent man. You see, this whole crucifixion of Yeshua was an illegal act. It was done by an illegal priesthood, under illegal pretenses, which was why it makes him an innocent sacrifice, isn't it? It's kind of like an oxymoron. They did it illegal. They put a man to death illegally. They conjured up things against him that were not true. But he still had to be a pure sacrifice anyway. So Yahweh still worked it to his advantage anyhow. So let's move on. They are going to eat it that night, which is the first day of unleavened bread, which is the 15th of Nisan. Let's look at John chapter 19, verse 14. The Jews' Passover, not Yeshua's. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. You see, because the Passover still is a preparation day, but what the Jews did is they moved it forward in the afternoon portion of the 14th to make that the preparation for the 15th when they'll eat their Passover. So it's a corrupting of what the day was used for. And he said to the Jews, Behold your king. This was the Jews' preparation day to make ready to eat the Passover that night on the first day of unleavened bread, which is the 15th. In Acts chapter 12, verse 3 through 4, we see the Passover week of the Jews. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now it was during the days of unleavened bread, that is, uncorrupted Passover week of the Jews. That's what it says in the Greek. Verse 4, So when he had arrested him, he put him in prison and delivered him to the four squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after the Passover. After the Passover. week, I should say. Judaism calls the Passover as 8 days of Passover or Passover week. Nowhere in Torah can we go in the Torah and find that we have 8 days of Passover. That's an oxymoron. I mean, Yahweh passed over the sins of Israel on one night. He doesn't pass over them for 8 days. It doesn't make any sense. Again, this is a watering down of Torah. It's a watering down of Yahweh's instructions. And what it does is Hasatan uses that to delude people into making no distinction between the Passover and the days of unleavened bread. You see, you can't be de-leavened of sin until you're first sanctified by the blood of Yeshua on Passover by the shedding of His blood. Once His blood is shed, and that's on the doorposts of your heart, now when the next day comes, you are de-leavened. You have no sin. You have no transgressions. You have nothing against you. That's what the days of unleavened bread are about. They have nothing to do with the Passover. Passover has its purpose. Days of unleavened bread have their spiritual significance. Let's move on. I'll look at the two Passover concepts. The Gospel appears to say that the Messiah ate a Passover meal with the 12 on the evening beginning the 14th. And John appears to say that Jews were having their Passover meal one day later. There are different theories to explain this. Let's kind of take a look at this a little bit. The Sadducees and Pharisees disagreed on the day of the Passover. Were you aware of that? There was a difference in those two different camps. And when I went through the Galatians series, where I talk about the 7 different types of Pharisees, and the house of Shammai, and the house of Hillel, and the Sadducees, and the Herodians, and the Ebionites, and all these different groups, you could see how crazy it was in them days. Those different camps had different philosophies of how they saw things. So one example is the Sadducees, which were the more conservative group, believed the feast of Passover and unleavened bread were separate feast days. That group believed they were separate feast days as we do today. They held the Passover on the 14th as Yahweh decreed in Exodus, Leviticus, and in the book of Numbers. Those of the majority opinion, including the Pharisees, held the Passover on the 15th. So, like today, we're in the small group. We're in the disadvantaged group in the sense that this is not a popular message amongst most of Nazarene Israel or Messianic Judaism. They are the majority, and they hold to the traditions. It's no different today than it was back then. The group that has it wrong was the majority. We're in the minority over here. The second one was thousands of people would come to Jerusalem to have their lambs ritually slain in the temple. If they only had one day in which to prepare for the Passover, it would have been extremely difficult to have slaughtered all the lambs brought in to be sacrificed. Therefore, they worked on 2 different time scales. The northern part of the country went in with the old way of dating, starting from morning and going to the following morning. The southern part of the country followed the official dating method from evening to evening. Thus, there were 2 times when the lambs were killed in the temple for the sacrifice. And you can find this written by Sampson R. and Pierce, L.A. Family Guide to Biblical Holidays. The interesting thing is that originally the southern kingdom had it right. But then by the time Yeshua came along, the southern kingdom, or the Jews, there was really no southern kingdom at that point, the Jews had corrupted it. And so this is why the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom split, because northern kingdom was getting involved with harlotry and idolatry, and the southern kingdom couldn't take it anymore, so there was a war, and they split between the two each other. So let's move on. If we believe Torah contains Moedim, which are appointed feasts, which sadly so many Torah teachers today are not teaching from that foundation, which is why we have so many different doctrines about end-time prophecy, because the Moedim, or the rehearsals and the shadow pictures that are contained in those feasts, which the substance of those things are in Yeshua, are lost. And so we don't know how to figure out how these prophecies actually come about, because those Moedim are not being practiced anymore. It's being substituted with tradition and rehearsals of yet future events that Yeshua would fulfill. Why are we so quick to allow traditional Judaism to take us away from that? And I understand the problem. The problem is that people are coming over from Christianity. They don't know anything. They're coming over blindly. And it's not really their fault. I don't blame them in that way. And so when they come over this way, it's automatically assumed, as I did many years ago, that surely the Jews must have it right. So I went to a Messianic temple. And what I found out was it was more messed up than Christianity. And that's why I had to come out of that. And so I realized this is a big mess. And so if you don't know that, if you don't know how to decipher that, then when you go into it, you become entrenched in it. And then you're stuck. And that's all you know, because you don't get to see the other side of the story, because they're telling you this is heresy, what I'm talking about here today. Let's move on. Yeshua came to fulfill the law, or the Torah. If he did not eat on the Passover, as I said earlier, as he himself states he would, then he did not fulfill what the Passover in Exodus was a shadow picture of. And we are compelled to look for a different Messiah. I just went through showing all the gospel accounts of what Yeshua said in his own words, that he would eat the Passover with his disciples. There cannot be any more arguments about this. And if you've got an argument against those words, and I brought many of them out, all of them that I could find, then you're going to have to show me where those words don't mean what they say they mean. And that's the only way you're going to convince me not to go with this way. In Matthew chapter 16, verse 11 and 12, it says, "How is it you do not understand and exercise your mind to comprehend?" You see, what this is telling us is that the reason a lot of times why people don't understand what's being spoken to them is because they don't set their mind by exercising it to comprehend. It's easier just to accept what somebody's telling you as truth. But you have to make a conscious decision that you're going to challenge this so-called truth and see whether it's so or not, like the Bereans. But too many of us don't. We come into this, it's given to us on a silver plate just this way. Accept it. This is what's been done for thousands of years. The Jews know what they're doing. This is correct. Don't challenge it. Anybody who tries to tell you something else, they've got doctrines of demons. That's what they'll tell you. "That I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." You see, this idea of the Passover being eaten on the night of unleavened bread is the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. It is their doctrine. Literally. And he's telling you not to eat of the bread, but don't eat of their doctrine. And yet this is the doctrine we're eating today in the body of Messiah. We're eating the doctrine of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Verse 12, "Then they understood that he did not tell them to be aware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees." So, second days of festivals. Let's take a look at this. The second day, holy day, although a rabbinical institution established because of the uncertainty of the calendar, was still regarded by the rabbis as of equal sanctity with the first day, which comes under Holy Days Jewish Encyclopedia of 1906. Question: why in Israel do families celebrate one Passover Seder, and in the North, American Jews celebrate two Seders? Because some groups, depending on which ones you go to, have two different philosophies. Answer is, in ancient times, the beginning of a new lunar month had to be determined by direct observation of the new moon. Among Jews, the only observation was official, was the one certified by the authorities in Jerusalem. This is what we try to go by today, as best as we can. This was necessary to make sure that all Jews observed the same calendar dates. However, many Jewish communities, including large Jewish communities in Babylon, could not reliably get word from Jerusalem about the day of the new moon before the holiday began on the 15th day of the month. It's an understandable problem, completely understandable. For this reason, Jewish communities outside the land of Israel adopted the practice of observing the extra day of the pilgrimage holy days, which is Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, just in case they had gotten the date of the new moon wrong. Noble. I have no problem with that in them days. No problem whatsoever. I'd even venture to say today that if somebody was confused about what was right, if you feel in your heart of hearts that you need to do it on another day, do it. Because to him who knows it is sin and he does it not, it is a sin to him. So for conscience sake, just go ahead and do it. There's nothing wrong with that. What I'm emphasizing is the direct dogma, specific word of what we're told in Torah, and by Yeshua, how this is to be done is being substituted by man's tradition. That's where my gripe is. That's where my beef is. That's what I'm coming against. That we know for certain, and that's what I'm dealing with. This practice for Jews outside the land of Israel continued even after mathematical models made it possible to calibrate the date of the new moon. And that comes from Rabbi Jeffrey Goldwasser. Why did the Jews in America have two Passover Seders? The Exodus and the Messiah parallel timeline. This is a slight glimpse. I'm going to be altering this a little bit in this next week and adding more to it. But this is a slight glimpse into the timeline or the parallel between what Moses and Israel did on Passover evening and what Yeshua and the disciples did exactly on the same night in the same way. And you will see day by day or moment by moment as we go through this timeline, and I'll break it down more in a more definitive kind of way. We'll take a look at what was happening hour by hour. We'll look at what Israel and Moses did, and we'll look at what Yeshua did exactly at the same moment, and what the spiritual meanings and the shadow pictures were these things. And then we're going to take a look at what tradition has done to the body of Messiah when they've switched the days. Because as soon as you switch the timeline, it gets out of synchronization. You ever watch a video on YouTube and you got a slow browser or something, or a slow computer, and you're hearing the sound and the words in the person's mouth is out of sync? You can't make sense of what's going on. It's confusing. And yet this is exactly what has happened in the body of Messiah. That what they're doing on the 15th does not line up with what Moses and Israel did. And it's out of sync. And it has no correct spiritual meaning. If anything, it has a wrong spiritual meaning to it. And it perverts the gospel, and it perverts Yeshua, and it perverts the Torah. And that's what we got to try to get back to, is getting it in sync so that when you see what's going on, it makes perfect sense. That's the whole point. So that ends part 2 for today. Next week we'll go into part 3, and we'll start taking a better look at how the day is actually constructed. I think you're going to find it interesting because you'll start to see that day is broken up into different segments. And we'll see in Scripture how those segments actually come into play, where we've been writing them off and not even realizing what Yahweh was trying to convey to us and what Yeshua was trying to convey to us. So let's go ahead and close in prayer, shall we? Abba, in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach, I pray, Yahweh, that anything I said today, if it was not of you, that please let it be disregarded and not accepted whatsoever. And I pray, Yahweh, that whatever I have said has honored you, Yahweh, has honored your word, that I've tried to do the best I can to articulate what you are trying to convey to us. Your Scripture tells us that your Spirit of truth will lead us into all truth, but it will only lead us into all truth if we give it permission. I have tried to let you have permission with me to show me this, even at times when there are things that were hard for me to swallow and I didn't want to accept it, and I sometimes thought there must be an explanation to get rid of it, but there was none, and I had to crucify my flesh, and I had to admit that what you were saying in your word was right, and I had to discard that which was not clean, that which is not acceptable, that which cannot be proven from your word. And so, Abba, I've tried not to take any liberties to go beyond into other realms to prove a point that I probably could prove, but I cannot prove it emphatically by your word, and I had to leave it out, Abba. To not sensationalize what Yeshua's words were when he said that he would eat that Passover with his disciples. And I've tried to keep it extremely tight and concise and strictly to what the word says and not outside of that. And for that, Yahweh, I thank you. I pray, Yahweh, that your people will hear and will understand what I have taught today and in the succeeding teachings that will come in the next few weeks, Yahweh, and that it will make complete sense to them when they see the whole thing. And I pray that the first and the second lesson that they may be watching on video, that they will not judge it without seeing the rest of the presentation, Abba. I pray that they will seek the truth of this in a spirit of truth, Yahweh. And so for that, I thank you. And I leave this into your hands in Yeshua's mighty name. Amen.